Welcome to another broadcast of MindYourHealthcast.com. It seems that these weeks roll around pretty fast, and before you know it, there's another broadcast, another subject sometimes, or a continuation of the old. And in a sense, they all interconnect. If you go back and look at my previous broadcasts, you see that they're all pieces like a jigsaw puzzle that are gradually being interwoven together with each other, so that at some point you end up with a big picture of the whole area of health, nutrition, and illness. It took a long time, in fact, probably 40 years for me to learn all the things that we're talking about. So if I talk real fast, maybe I can put them back out in 20 years. But we'll see how it works out. At any rate, I have chosen a topic for today, which is kind of interesting. Probably a lot of people haven't stopped to think about it. Unfortunately, most people are influenced by the mass media. And so whatever they publish or say in the newscasts or whatever, people jump on the bandwagon and assume it to be true. And it's kind of an interesting thing about people. If you read it on a computer, it seems to have more authority than if you read it in a book. And if you read it in a book, it seems to have more authority than someone telling it to you. There's something about it appearing separate from people that makes it more credible, but not necessarily so, because you can publish in a book untruths, whether deliberate or non-deliberate. You can put out a news broadcast. I've seen many news broadcasts that later had to be retracted because it was not good information at the time. But at any rate, my purpose is not that you have to believe what I say, but to provoke you to think about it and to go searching on your own, because ultimately what you find out for yourself and convince yourself is going to be the most important information you glean. And not only that, it's going to be permanent as a rule in your mind because you spent the time and effort and energy to learn it. The subject that I picked today, as I said, is one that a lot of people haven't given too much thought about, and it has to do with fats and sugars critical to good health. And now some people might say, now wait a minute, all we hear about sugar and fats are all the bad things about them. And the big problem is that there's very little knowledge in terms of the general public about all the different types of fats and all the different types of sugars. It's not quite that simple. I mean, it seems simple when you say sugar, but sugar can mean a lot of things. Now, really, I guess that in most cases what people consider to be sugar is the sugar they buy at the supermarket and that they put in their sugar bowl and put on things. And so many people feel, well, that stuff is bad, but yet they love the taste of it, and it seems to be pretty actually it's addictive, and that in itself, excuse me, makes a big problem. So, as soon as you say the word sugar, that's what most people think, is this table sugar. Now, the fact is that the table sugar is a type of sugar among a huge array of sugars. More often, most of the sugars are actually not only beneficial, but actually necessary for our body to function properly. But the table sugar in itself is stripped, number one, of all of its nutrients, except the sugar part, and is not synergistic with the body the way it's concentrated. Now, in the foods that you eat that contain sugars, those sugars are blended with all other kind of factors, fats, other types of carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and all kinds of things. And so those things that occur synergistically in nature seem to be very useful and beneficial to the body as a whole. Now, of course, there's always those rare exceptions to everything. And some things are very good or important, but only in very small amounts. But at any rate, the sugar that you eat on the table is not so good in the sense that is it being stripped of all of its synergistic nutrients and concentrated. And so some people wanting to improve their health have gotten away from the sugar and also think, wow, that sugar could put on fat, and I don't want to get fat. So all of a sudden, over the years, the market opened up for the artificial sweeteners. So suddenly, many, many years ago when I was young, saccharin was the only thing that was out there. And many people used it for years and years to sweeten things and thought they were doing themselves a service. Well, at some point down the road, of course, information came out that the saccharin actually was not so good, but potentially created a health hazard. And after many, many, many years of it, finally the FDA made some declarations regarding it. And so then we saw all of these new types of sweeteners come out to take the place of sugar. And so we have them in pink packs and yellow packs and blue packs and so forth, all claiming to be very good and to take in place of sugar, which in fact is not the case. In fact, one of them in particular, NutraSweet, has been researched by a group of doctors in Mississippi, with the University of Mississippi, Dr. Blaylock in particular, and a group of his colleagues. And these are people who are experts in the brain nervous system. They're not just the average doctor, but in the field of neurology. And their studies have indicated that the NutraSweet actually is a big problem in terms of what it does to the brain nervous system. And so he published a book, Dr. Blaylock did, called Excitotoxins, and it's about what these do to the brain. They overstimulate the brain, and so he said that in the long run it can damage neurons or even kill neurons. And that's what their research is showing, and they found that in young children with developing brains, the damage could be 10 times more than with adults. And so they have gone to the FDA and made complaints, and the FDA has poo-pooed their claims and has continued to allow it to be sold. And of course, one of the reasons is it's a billion-dollar market, and once anything gets into the billions, there's too much money at stake to pull it away as long as you can leave it there without too much criticism from the public about it. It seems that the amount of concern that develops with the FDA has to do with the amount of public outcry that goes on. And I've said before, and I say again, the public has no idea of how much power they have if they set their mind to something and want change. But as a rule, people tend to sit back and allow someone else to supposedly do the thinking for them, and in many cases trust their health to people who are more motivated by the financial side than by the benefit side. And so we see things stay on the market. I mentioned before about one of the big COX-2 inhibitors that came out on the market that everybody thought was going to be magic for arthritic pain and so forth. And before it ever got pulled off of the market, the company's made billions of dollars. And number two, about 150,000 people died from it before it ever got off the market. And of course, I always say it's very interesting. A drug can be on the market and having a tremendous number of people die or be seriously injured by it, and it seems to not be able to get off the market. But take any natural substance and only one case suspected, and immediately it's off the market. To me, it's kind of fascinating how fast they can act when it is in the best interest of the pharmaceuticals. And I've watched that over the years, and in many cases, it ended up that it was totally false, but nonetheless, the product got pulled off because almost no one really had a problem with it. I remember one of the herbs back along the way that one person who had taken a large amount of a particular herb and their liver had inflamed. Now, there was no study that showed a direct relationship between this herb, and basically that herb is a cleansing herb, so I'm sure what it did, it released a lot of toxins from the body that the liver had to take care of, and most people are not aware, but when the liver is having to deal with a lot of things at one time, for example, if you ate a huge meal with all kinds of chemicals and additives and food colorings and so forth in it, your liver can actually swell up to twice its size working on handling all this at one time. And so my suspicion was, because I'm very familiar with the herb and it's been in use for centuries, so it wasn't like it was some newcomer, and it was pulled from the market because one person, it was suspected, might have had an inflammation of the liver taking it. But on the other hand, this other drug, 150,000 people know and dropped dead, and it still remained on the market. Now, I know occasionally I get on a bit of a tirade about the FDA, and I get on a bit of a tirade about the pharmaceutical industry, but if you knew it to the level that I know it, you would be quite concerned and disturbed about what they get away with and what they put out into the public, and know that it's a problem. And once they get it out there, it's going to stay there for a long time before it gets pulled, no matter how many people are claiming to be injured and or die with it. It's going to stay there for a long time before a lot of press. And as I mentioned before, if it doesn't get a lot of press, it won't be pulled. And I mentioned before there was one on the market, an antiarrhythmic drug, and it never was pulled. It's still on the market. And there was I don't know now today how many deaths have occurred from it, but I know very shortly after it was released on the market, there was about 50,000 people dropped dead with it, but it's still there because it did not get in the press. So it tells me that the FDA's real concern is not with the safety of the public, but it's with the welfare of the producers of these drugs, and they look out for their interests, which is why they jump so hard on anything from the natural health field, is because it's competition, and if it appears that it could be a threat, they're going to pull it off the market if they can find any excuse whatsoever. And unfortunately, we pay the price. Now, as we talk about some of the subject today, we're going to be hitting into that again about the pharmaceutical industry as it relates to it. And for those of you who have heard it before, I hope you bear with me, but I know that many of these broadcasts are only seen alone and not in conjunction with having seen several others, so may be unaware of what I bring up, and so I kind of need to give a little background so that I can provoke those people to go out and look for themselves. Again, I am not trying to get you to believe it because I say it, but I want what I say to be provocative enough to you that you will go and find out for yourself. And if you still think it's good, then fine, it's your right to take it. If it is not good, then I'm hoping that you're going to be willing to change and maybe join in with the protest of what is being shoved off on us at a high price, with the implication that it's going to improve our health, which in fact hardly any pharmaceutical ever improves your health. It may cover over some symptoms, but it's not going to improve your health. The things that I'm talking about today are things that can actually improve your health. And so that's why I'm bringing it to your attention, and I'm hoping to enhance your education a little bit and to provoke you into, as I say, start looking on your own and don't take anything at face value that's presented. Be willing to go out and search it. With the internet capability today, with all the search engines and the ways you can find information, there's no reason for anyone to be uneducated in any subject. Now, I'm not saying everything you pick up on the internet is going to be accurate, but if you look at enough sources, you'll be able to sort it out and you'll be able to determine, oh, well, yeah, because I saw that happen some time back. There was a particular nutrient on the market, and I happened to pick up this one citation that was saying, oh, it's dangerous and that the people who have been taking it could have seriously injured themselves. And I thought, that's strange. And I started looking more, but out of hundreds or even thousands of studies, this was the only one that said that it was a detriment. Now, I'm not saying maybe the person doesn't have some merit in what they're talking about, but I know that more than one person would have come up with it in today's world if there was merit to what they had to say. So I've never heard again what this particular person said. So my suspicion is, for whatever reason, that person was motivated to post that. Evidently, to me, it must have had something to do with his own personal interest or bias that he made the comment. Now, I know, of course, there's lots of people that are against still taking any kind of supplementation, and they are believing what they were told that by many of the doctors over the years, until finally, actually, the New England Journal of Medicine changed their position. But for many years, of course, they said it's a waste of time to take supplements. You're throwing your money away. You're making expensive urine. You don't need to take it. You just need to take some real medicine. And they said that for ages until it became apparent that the people were going to take it anyhow. So once that happened, they decided to join in as though they had never opposed it before, and they jumped on the bandwagon and started producing multiple vitamins and various types of supplements. And led on as though, well, of course, everyone knows you should take supplements. But for years and years, I heard them say, what a waste of money. It's worthless. It's not going to do anything for your health. All you have to do is eat a good balanced meal, and that's it. But it, unfortunately, doesn't work that way, because has our health, in spite of every argument that's made, you only really need to look at one question. Are we healthier today than we were 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 50 years ago? And of course, anybody, unless they're totally blind, will say, we seem to be sicker. We seem to have more chronic illness than ever. Every few years, we're told that more and more people are going to have cancer, until now it's down to almost 50% of the American public will, in their life, have cancer. Now, if all these drugs that were being peddled to us were making us healthier, we would see a decrease. But we haven't. But yet every year, the various researchers of cancer go out and put on all these campaigns, and they drop all these tidbits on the news, leading you to believe, well, we're on the verge of something. We have some things that show promise. Give us your money, and we're going to research some more, and someday we're going to solve this war on cancer. And of course, there's two of the terms that I'm not real fond of. One is always about fighting everything, and the other is the war or the battle. When you hear on the news, well, so-and-so lost their battle with cancer, they weren't having a battle with cancer. Their body was a mess, and for whatever reason, was missing all kinds of nutrients. And this has been proven by regular medicine years ago, but it was not good for the companies making all the therapies for cancer, so it kind of slipped by the wayside. But they knew, and have known for a long time, that if the body really did have the nutrition it needs, that the likelihood of getting cancer or any of these problems that are so prevalent today would be very unlikely. Now, we just did a broadcast about the missing elements in the soil today and the commercially grown foods being missing of all those things. So consequently, if you're eating the regular diet of the regular food, then you're probably going to be extremely nutritionally deficient. And as I say, all we have to do is just look at what the health status is of people today, and we can't say that we are healthier than we were before. And I won't even take the time to get into the lifespan thing, but I did mention it before, the difference between the average actual lifespan and the average life expectancy, which is a generated probability factor that really does not coincide with real life. At any rate, we are talking as much as possible in our broadcasts about things you need to know if you do really want to be healthy, and the things you need to stay away from, and the questions you need to ask before you take things that are presented to you today. And even within the field of supplements, it's not cut and dried. And I don't want you to think that because I'm talking about taking food supplements or vitamin factors or whatever, that I'm saying that all those that are out on the market are really good, because they are not necessarily good. There are unfortunately cons in the natural health field, the same as there are in the regular. So you will hear me along the way be critical of those that are making a lot of money off of selling garbage and calling it nutrition, as the other groups are. So I'm not prejudiced in the sense that I think that everybody who holds up a supplement and says that you should take it, it's great, that it is. And that's getting back to what I said. You need to look for yourself. You need to start searching. You need to spend some time, because your health really does depend on it. We're in this instant age that we like to take things, and that those things are going to, in an instant, take care of all the symptoms we have, and then we deceive ourselves into thinking we're well because we've taken some drug that's covering over our symptoms, which is not the case. And I've mentioned that many times, but I keep reminding you. So today, this fats and sugars are very important, not the table sugar that most people think of, which is sucrose. Sucrose is it's what's called a disaccharide. Now you're going to hear mentioned the term saccharide, and it's another term for a sugar. A sugar is a saccharide. So we have monosaccharides, we have disaccharides, we have polysaccharides, and those refer to how many sugars there are of the different kinds of sugars in a particular complex. So if we say that table sugar, sucrose, is actually a disaccharide, it's composed of two sugars together. Now, when they're in the powdered form, they're the two separate sugars mixed together. But when you add water, they actually separate into two separate sugars. One is glucose and one is fructose. The two of those work differently in the body. The glucose is actually one of the beneficial sugars. The fructose puts some stress on your body handling it, but the glucose can be burned right away by your body to make energy. And so glucose is one of those very important sugars that we're going to be talking about. Now, these are actually have taken on the name or term glyconutrients, because as of now they've isolated at least 8 different ones that are very important. I just saw some recent research that indicated that there could be 10. Now, it's interesting because researchers, supposedly their field is to get money, usually either put up by government, universities, foundations, individual contributors. Somewhere they get money to research a particular subject. And so they write a proposal for the money, and then they hope that they're going to get the people contribute money. Now, that money pays their salary, and the staff that they assemble together to do that research pays their salary, unless sometimes it might be graduate students that are having to do that as part of their training and education. But at any rate, they propose they're going to get this information, which can be beneficial for us for health. Now, the unfortunate part of that is that sometimes they have decided they're going to make their living as a researcher, so keeping the research going and keeping the money coming in to keep their salary going becomes more important than what they produce. And so you, in my mind, you want to know what is the return on your investment. If you're contributing money to research, is research producing something worth the money that's being put into it? Sometimes yes, but a lot of times no. But in any case, supposedly that information is for public use and knowledge, as well as other researchers, manufacturers, you name it. Well, in any case, the glyconutrients that we mentioned, which is the term that's given to at least 8 at this point, have been researched. In fact, I have a research journal that the whole journal is on nothing but glyconutrient research articles. So it's been gaining a lot of interest. Now, it's interesting that a group of people who became intrigued with the value of glyconutrients ended up establishing a company, and they're, of course, wanting to sell products, which is fine. If they have a product and it has worthwhile, I think that's great, as long as they don't price it outside the ballpark, so to speak, till it's not, and make wild claims way beyond what is capable. Now, I would say that this company has not done that. However, they have cited some of the research that's been done showing the function of these glyconutrients in the human body. Well, you know that most of the research is done by regular medicine and the regular scientific community, and it's not done for the purpose of course, the natural health field or products related to natural health or good health. It's pretty much used to give you information to patent a drug that you can sell and make a lot of money on. And it peeves them sometimes if somebody cites their research and they get real peeved about it to the point that they start complaining, well, we want to make it clear that we're not in any way endorsing this company or this product. In fact, we don't even want them or like them using our information. Well, somebody paid for that information. Somebody paid for that research for the purpose of the betterment of humankind, and that's what it should be used for. The company is not saying that the researchers endorse their particular product. What they're saying is that there is research showing the importance of these glyconutrients in health and human body function. So if you run across some negative comment being made by a researcher, well, we're not endorsing that and we're not saying that, blah, 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 the company who cites them is not saying that either. All they're saying is there is now valid scientific research stating that there's value in these particular nutrients in your body. So they then are offering those kinds of nutrients for sale, which I see nothing wrong with. And they as I say, they didn't claim that the research was done by them, because in fact, had it been done by them, then people would say, well, you probably tainted the research in some way to try to prove that your product is good so you can sell it. Now, I'm taking a lot of time in telling you some of this because I'm trying to teach you a bit about how to think and how to look at what's out there, because there is a tremendous amount of information and you're going to have to sort through a lot of information. So you need to develop a critical capability of analyzing it and saying, is it saying what somebody's saying it's saying, or is it somehow being misused, or is it being distorted? Because that does happen. You'll find that many times that happens, that you'll have this giant leap. And I've read that before. I've read advertising material about a product that said, oh, this is good for you. And I can give you an example. Vitamin E, many years ago, was very heavily researched by a couple brothers out of Canada. Both of them were doctors, and they researched vitamin E heavily. Now, this is way back before a lot of people thought about taking vitamins and nutrients. There was only a few what were called health nuts that were doing it. So anyhow, the Schutz did all this research on vitamin E and the cardiovascular system, and they published a lot of findings, and they weren't selling vitamin E, they just were researching it, the benefits. Well, the merchandisers who saw this research immediately took advantage of a loophole that says, you can offer something kind of generic and something that's never been researched, but there's some similarities with something that has, and then you can kind of infer, if not outright claim, that you're selling the product that was researched. And so what they played on was the fact that there's 4 major fractions in vitamin E: the alpha, beta, and gamma, and delta factors. So there's 4 different parts of vitamin E. The vitamin E that the 2 doctors used for the research contained the full E complex. Well, unfortunately, the FDA allows a company who's selling one of those fractions to still call it vitamin E. And so they only have the alpha portion, but that's not the worst part of it. You can have a natural vitamin E, which means it comes from plant sources, or you can make it synthetically. So when you make it synthetically, it's a mixture. So you get something like D-alpha tocopherol. Now that means part left turn molecule, part right turn molecule, but they don't know how much of either, or if they do, they're not publishing it. One of those doesn't work at all, and the other is a synthetic of only one portion of vitamin E. So what happens is, then they still are allowed to sell it as vitamin E. So if you have a good mixed tocopherol vitamin E made from real food sources, that vitamin E will probably cost you $25 for 100 capsules of 400 international units. But you can make D-alpha tocopherol and sell it for 100 capsules of what they call 400 international units for $3.99. Now, 2 things happen. Either one, the people look at, here's this one's $25, this one's $4, they're both 100 capsules, they both say they're 400 units. Well, what's the difference? The difference is that the good one has 400 units of a mixture of the 4 natural tocopherols, and the other has 400 units of one fraction of the 4, and it's not even from a plant source, it's synthetically manufactured. So it's DL tocopherol. DL alpha, actually, DL alpha tocopherol. So that's what it is. Now, that's not the worst part of it. To get it at $3.99, something is not right if it has any quality for 100 capsules. So a biochemist I know from out in the state of Washington did some work with the Linus Pauling Institute about quality of nutrients and supplements. And so they went to some stores and they purchased bottles of this 400 international unit DL alpha tocopherol. And they took it to the laboratory and they started doing some testing. Well, unfortunately, lo and behold, they found that not only was it not from natural sources, it was synthetically manufactured. Number 2, it was not a full vitamin E, so it was actually deceptive to lead the public to believe they were buying a good vitamin E when they bought it. And number three, when they actually took it in the lab and analyzed it, they found there was only 4 international units, not 400. So that was only 1/100th of what was supposed to be there, and the rest of the capsule was filled with cheap polyunsaturated vegetable oil. Now, so that's what I'm talking about, of everything not being what it appears. But to the average person, they said, oh, they both say vitamin E. Well, the FDA wouldn't allow them to say vitamin E if it wasn't vitamin E. Well, it is a fraction of vitamin E, but it's not the whole thing. So I'm saying this to say you need to be educated. So when you're looking at the fats and the sugars that we're talking about today, I'm not going to go into great detail, because if you get into too much chemistry, people go into mind lock right away that are not chemists and say, forget that, I don't know what he's talking about. So I want to make it simple, but I'm saying this as a prelude to get your mind ready to go out and dig it out for yourself, and don't jump at the first thing you hear. Oh, this guy says that's a waste of time. What kind of research does he have that shows that it's a waste of time to take it? And are they talking about the same thing that they're talking about taking? Because there's different ways of arriving at stuff. For example, you can take a fruit, you can pick it fresh, you can immediately squeeze the juice from it, and then you can either freeze it or dehydrate it or whatever, and preserve enzymes and a lot of factors in it, antioxidants and so forth. Or you can take the fruit and squeeze the juice, and you can truck it around and transport it and keep it out long enough till the enzymes all deteriorate, the antioxidants all deteriorate, and then at some point you can turn around and offer to sell it and allude to the fact you're going to get the same benefit as the other product that was handled very carefully and was not allowed to deteriorate. But you have no way of knowing that. Now, at some point, we're going to talk about ways that you can check some of the food and see whether it has any value in it or not. Because there's a lot of food out there that does not, including even so-called organically grown, which, as I mentioned before, has to do with the method of growing, not the soil that it came from. So if you grow organically a fruit or a vegetable in depleted soil, you're going to have a fruit or vegetable that is depleted, because they get the nutrients from the soil. If it's not there, they're not going to have it. I don't care if it was grown organically or not. So you have to learn how to determine, does it really have any value to it, or am I paying a lot of money for something not much better than I could buy for a lot less money? So that could happen also. So we're going to be talking about some ways that you can do it, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune to be able to do that. Just so that I'm letting you know that we're wanting you to become informed consumers, so you know what and how to look at things, not only analyze what's being said about something, but also do some of your own testing and determine, does this stuff have what it's supposed to have in it? Now, I can tell by taste almost immediately. If I grew up in my early years, we were very poor and we were forced to eat organic food. And so I know what it tastes like. And it was, nobody was talking about organic, because back then everybody was growing good food in good soil without all the chemicals. So they didn't call it organic, it was just food, because everybody was producing it the same way. But when we got big commercial interests going out and growing huge amounts year after year in the same fields and not replacing things that are depleted, then at some point the soil becomes worthless. And that happened, as a previous broadcast I did about the soil and about how way back in the 20s and 30s already they knew it was a major problem. And so here we are moving into almost a century later, and the problem has not improved, it's actually gotten worse. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these sugars more so. There is a good book that's out, and it should be understandable by the average person, and I'm sure, I think I have another couple in my library, but there's others out there, and there's a lot of research on the internet, and this has to do with glyconutrients. Okay, so this book is written for the general public, but it's written by an MD by the name of Emil I. Mondoa. And he's, if I recall, a pediatrician, and he's heavy into diet, nutrition, and so forth. And so the book is called Sugars That Heal, The New Healing Science of Glyconutrients. Okay, very good book, and he says it's a revolutionary healing program based on 8 natural essential sugars. Now, notice the term essential. These sugars are sugars that are needed in the body for it to function properly. Now, as I said, there's one group of researchers have suggested there could even be 10. But at the same time, they're very peeved that these people selling glyconutrients would refer to their research. Well, somebody paid for that research, and it's public information, so what? Okay, he says how to add these sugars to your diet so that you can live a longer, healthier life. Fight diseases. I don't care for that term, but that's okay. Fight diseases, prevent infection, and boost your immune system. Now, this is something that he's saying can be a benefit from these sugars. Now, interestingly, these sugars all are either in plants, and some of them are in some of the so-called medicinal mushrooms, especially from Japan and so forth, and of course some in this country too, but some of the big ones that you've heard about from Japan, and that are being used for serious illnesses. In other words, some of these extracts from some of the mushrooms are being used for things like cancer and very serious problems because they have such a powerful immune boosting factor. That he's talking about in this book. Now, they go into these 8 in detail, and so you might want to get the book and read it. It's not a great big book. It's not real heavy. But at the flyleaf, at the beginning, the person who is reviewing this says, sugars that heal sounds like a contradiction in terms, because, again, we've been saying that sugar's not so good for you. But it's the key to one of the most important breakthroughs in recent medical science. We've all been bombarded with warnings about the evils of consuming too much sugar, but in fact, for our bodies to function properly, we need small amounts of 8 essential sugars, only 2 of which, glucose and galactose, are commonly found in our limited overprocessed diets. When all 8 sugars are available, the human benefits can be astonishing. Individuals regain their ability to fight disease, reactivate their immune system, ward off infection. Based on cutting-edge research and the rapidly evolving science of glyconutrients, Sugars That Heal is an exciting new approach to health and disease prevention. As I say, a very good book. It's not highly technical, but of course there's no way you can write a book of this nature without being somewhat technical. Now, he gives some examples of each of the things that we were just talking about. And he shows where things like cancer and AIDS and all of these benefit, and they actually have studies showing that occurs when they take these nutrients. Now, that's not to say that everyone who takes the nutrients are automatically going to get well from everything, because why would that be? Well, the reason is, of course, that some people can have a lot of other things missing too. And one would be the fatty acids. And others could be minerals and key vitamin factors. So it's not just these nutrients, but these nutrients in conjunction with other things. Now, sometimes that I've noticed with nutrients in general, that if you take things, even though it may not be the key thing, it jumpstarts your body enough till things start changing which encourages you to go on and you start looking for other things, and pretty soon you become knowledgeable enough that you make sure you have all the things in your body that's known to be beneficial. Now, everybody, of course, is slightly different, and we're very individual. I've mentioned before in my broadcast, there's a book out by actually more than one book, a researcher, a PhD researcher by the name of Roger Williams, and he wrote a book called Biochemical Individuality. And he says that different people need different amounts of things. So, of course, we don't know for a fact how much of a particular vitamin. Somebody may only need a few milligrams of a particular vitamin. Another may need 10 times that amount for their body to function right, because we all have a different genetic and epigenetic background. So consequently, they're going to maybe need more. But the fact is that almost everyone is going to need some of all these things. And that has to be titrated and adjusted to the individual. Now, is it possible to take too much? Of course. And nutrients, like anything else, whether it's nutrients or herbs, if you take too much, you can, of course, have the opposite effect. I think I've mentioned that before many times, but you need to keep that in mind. And this was reminded to us a few years ago. It was found after they came up with something that they referred to as premenstrual syndrome. I remember when that diagnosis came along, and all of these people said, wow, now we have a name for it. It seems like once we give it a name, we call it a disease, and once we call it a disease, we immediately jump in to market all kinds of things for that disease. And so it was interesting that this B6 was noticed by some people to improve the symptoms related to PMS. Now, if it does, then what does that tell you? It tells you that person is deficient. Okay, so in some cases, and there were just a handful of cases, I think about 6, that got all this news attention. Oh, you have to be careful of B6. It could be very bad. It could affect your nervous system. It could do all these bad things. Now, that was in the early days when the pharmaceuticals were still trying to keep people from taking vitamins and minerals and so forth. And so they published this big article, B6 can be dangerous. Okay, so I thought, well, what is it about B6 that's going to be so dangerous? And I started looking. Well, it ended up, there were about 5 or 6 cases, period. Okay, at least that were reported. Okay, one case was that a lady took the B6 on her own and had never taken any vitamins, knew nothing about vitamins, but heard that B6 might help. So she took some of it, maybe a couple of 100 milligrams, and she felt better. So she thought, well, if some is good, then a lot more is a lot better. And so she raised her dose up from a couple 300 milligrams up to 2,000 or 3,000 milligrams. And she started to notice some numbness and tingling in her hands and fingers and so forth. And so she got scared, and they said, well, she took too much. Well, first of all, anybody who studied nutrition knows it's not a good idea to take a single vitamin factor apart from a complex, like one B vitamin instead of the whole complex of B vitamins. So you could take the whole complex plus some extra of that particular one if you thought you really needed it. So then the other 2 cases were gynecologists who, their patients, they had read that the B6 could help. And again, they gave them some and they felt better, so they jumped them up to 3,000 or 4,000 milligrams. And so they developed the tingling. And then some psychiatrists, I think 1 or 2 psychiatrists, did the same thing about it, and they way over. I think that they were given like 6,000 or 7,000 milligrams. Anyhow, all they had to do was quit taking it, and the symptoms disappeared. But the point is that you can take too much, but you don't know how much is too much for particular people because different people have a different requirement. So the same thing is going to be true with the sugars. I mean, you can take them, and when you take them, if you feel improvement, you can increase it. It's been around long enough now that there are some general guidelines that normally can keep you within a window of somewhere in there is going to be enough for you, but you can always back down if you feel it. Instead of improving, you're going the other way. So it's better to titrate up slowly than to jump in and go fast. Now, what do these things do? Well, these glyconutrients, again, we're not going to bore you with all the different kinds of them, but these nutrients, these glyconutrients, they combine with other types of molecules in the body to carry out certain functions. And the one thing that we really want to focus heavy on is the cell membranes. Now, these are going to do a lot of things in a lot of areas through the body. They mention immune system. They talk about diabetes. They talk about cancer. They talk about AIDS. They talk about ongoing inflammations in the body that people can't seem to get rid of, and so forth. So when you read the book, you'll see all the different areas that this doctor suggests it's useful for. But at any rate, the cell membrane is one of the most important uses of these because these glyconutrients form compounds with proteins called glycoproteins. And that enhances their capabilities in the body. And they also will join with proteins in the cell membrane. And in the cell membrane, they act as recipients of messages to the cell, telling the cell what to do. In other words, when a message is sent out, every cell in the body is interconnected. There are little molecules on the surface of the cells called integrins that connect to the same factors on other cells, and those act like telephone network. In other words, it's like you're plugging in your telephone, and when you do that, then it carries on to other cells so that you can send a message throughout the whole body very rapidly. In fact, it's more rapid than a nervous transmission in the body. You can send this information that tells all the cells what to do. So they're all plugged into the network, plus they're plugged into fibers that interconnect everything in the body together, and it's part of this matrix system. And you can read about that. I mentioned before to you who are new that there's two really good books, because everybody always says, and all the doctors about, now there's some that don't say that, but most of them do. You go to the doctor and say, what do you think about natural therapies or natural substances? Oh, there's no research. I want to see some research. Well, of course, if you know anything about the research field, you would know how things get phonied anyhow in terms of regular medicine, but we're not even going to get into that today. We did that when we were talking about the pharmaceuticals. But the fact is that there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Oshman. He's a PhD researcher, and several years ago he began to realize that there's all kind of research out there done by regular scientific community and medical community that verifies all the things that are being done in natural medicine. And it so impressed him that he wrote a book, the first one, called Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis. And he cites all these studies that verify all the things that we're talking about, such as what I'm telling you right now. It verifies all. The information is there. Then he later followed up with a second book called Energy Medicine in Therapeutics and Human Performance. And he elaborated even more on the findings. Well, in one of those books, he has drawn a diagram of the body showing how the nervous system spreads through the body and how this matrix system spreads through the body, and how the matrix is actually much more involved because it connects every cell together. It's not just like the nerves that go into certain areas, but all the cells are connected to this matrix system. And he talks about that we're talking about information traveling basically at the speed of light between every cell in the body, if every cell's connected and working right. So anyhow, the sugars are part of, these sugar factors we're talking about, are part of that network in the sense that they form glycoproteins that are receptor sites for this information. So they not only accept these signals, but all kinds of cell signalers in the body. There's special molecules in the body that are called cell signalers that carry signals to tell the cell to do certain things. One of which is to make a new protein or to produce whatever is needed. It's going to get that information to make more energy. That message goes to the cell. The mitochondria gear up and start making more energy because they get a message that's picked up through these receptor sites. Now, we don't have time to get into the receptor sites in great detail, but only to mention to you that they're important. So we have all these receptor sites, and they're transferring information back and forth, and everything in the body is controlled by information, and so that's the biophysics of the body that controls the information. The biochemistry is the end product that carries out the processes that are signaled by this information. And so we're told, okay, we're going to have to gear up because we're going to be running, so we need more energy, and that information goes out. Now, the information comes from a lot of different sources. That information is going to come from the mind, our conscious mind. That information is going to come from our unconscious mind. It's going to come from the environment. It's going to come from the epigenetic factors in our body. These are all things that are going to determine how the body functions, repairs itself, and either stays healthy or gets sick. Those are all controlled. Now, most people don't give a thought about the cell membrane, so I got to talk a little bit more about the cell membrane. And the cell membrane is a double layer of what are called phospholipids. What that means is that it's almost like what's called a dielectric. It's an insulator that these two membranes come together and form, and therefore it's capable of developing an electrical charge on the membrane. That electrical charge then, in turn, helps to keep things out that need to be kept out, helps to keep things in that need to be kept in, and helps transport things in that need to get in there temporarily and byproducts back out. So all these processes need to take place and be protected, and so the cell membrane contains all of that, and it contains this electrical charge. Now, the electrical charge is in millivolts, and so a healthy cell membrane is going to have so many millivolts. And that range actually has been measured, and the range is from 70 to 120 millivolts. The higher the voltage, the more healthy the cell. Okay, so if you see that's true, then you right away could interpret less voltage, less healthy, which is in fact true. Now, I don't know what you know about electronics or what you know about something called a capacitor. But a capacitor is two conductive plates separated by a dielectric. A dielectric means that does not conduct electricity. So you have this plate, and you can put a charge on those plates of voltage. Okay, so in the cell membrane, you have between the outside and the inside of that membrane what's called a potential drop in electronics, which is measured in volts, and that potential drop is approximately 70 to 120 millivolts. Now, as long as that's present, that cell is going to function healthy, and when it eventually starts to wear out, it's going to build a new replacement cell, and then it's going to die off naturally, which is called apoptosis. Now, that's the natural process of how your body rebuilds itself. And that's called anabolism when it's building, and catabolism when it's breaking down. Now keep that in mind, because later that's going to be important when we talk about fats, which I doubt that we're really going to get to talk about today, because it looks like that time, as usual, is getting away. But at any rate, it's important to have this potential, and in fact there is a way to measure that. And very important measurement, it's called parallel capacitance. In other words, what do all the cells in the body, the cell membranes, what is their capability of holding an electrical charge? And it's measured by an instrument called a bioimpedance analysis instrument, or a body composition analysis instrument. And one of the factors that are very critical is cell membrane integrity. That means that the cell membrane has to be intact, and it has to be working properly to maintain this voltage across the membrane. Then, if it drops, as I say, the person is getting less well or more sick, depending on how you want to look at it. Well, when it gets down to somewhere in the vicinity of 45 millivolts, that's usually the condition, along with other factors, to bring on something called malignancy. And so a malignant cell will tend to have a lower frequency or a lower voltage on the cell membrane. Now, as that malignant cell expands and grows, the voltage tends to drop even more. When it hits about 25 millivolts, that cell will divide and form a second one. So the faster it drops the voltage down, the faster a new cell will form, another cancer cell. Now, keeping that in mind, then it would seem reasonable if you could improve the cell membrane and improve its capacitance, or its capacity to hold a charge, and raise it up, you could either prevent it from becoming a malignant cell, or potentially, now as I say, there's some other factors we would probably want to consider, but it would be one of the conditions in turning a malignant cell into a non-malignant cell. But the cell membrane is extremely important, and there's a whole book out there and a lot of material now that tells us the fact that the cell membrane is really the brain of the cell. It controls what happens in that cell, controls what message gets in the cell, controls what nutrients get in the cell. And of course, if the cell is going to build new proteins, which is what the DNA codes for, then it has to have amino acids. So those amino acids have to get inside the cell. And the proteins have to be synthesized, and once they're synthesized, they have to be able to travel back out of the cell and go to the places where they're needed. So there's all these processes. So Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is a PhD researcher, he's a cell biologist, whatever, he's taught in medical schools, he's written some books, he's lectured all over the world. I've talked to him before. I haven't been with him in person, but I've talked to him on the phone more than once, and got excited about what he was doing many years ago. And so he says that the cell membrane has all the characteristics of a microprocessor, which means it's like in your computer, you have a microprocessor that controls the functions of the computer. You have a microprocessor on each cell that controls the function of that cell. Now, because all the cells interconnect all the other cells, then in a sense, it's like a giant network of all these things going on. Now, something can damage one and it can be decommissioned, but the rest of the cells are still going to operate as a whole, which means if this cell becomes malignant and your body's immune system doesn't take care of it, then it can grow into a foreign body inside your body, because that's what malignancy is. It's now a mutant, non-differentiated cell that is growing on its own. It's no longer being controlled by the body. As fast as it can get certain sugars, like glucose, it is going to produce energy and therefore can replicate faster. Okay, so that membrane is very important, and Bruce Lipton has a book out called The Biology of Belief, where he gets heavily into the cell membranes and what they do and how they work and the whole concept of what I'm talking about, making it the brain of the cell, not the nucleus with the DNA, as many people, that's the brain of the cell. It's not. It's a library of information contained within the DNA, and the rest of the cell has to be told what it needs to access out of that library and cause it to synthesize certain proteins that are needed. But a message has to go to it to tell it to do that. It doesn't do it on its own. Now, those messages can be of different sorts. There can be a message from, as I said, your mind. They can be a message from your unconscious mind. They could be a message from your epigenetics. And we're not going to have time today, but we'll talk a little bit more about the epigenetics because they're very important in this whole process. And we're not going to get too much time to talk about, in fact, we're not, to talk about the nutrition. But Bruce Lipton says our environment and the nutrition we get are all important. So the environment is another factor, and the nutrition. So I have mentioned before this book called Deep Nutrition, written by a Catherine Shanahan, MD, Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food, and traditional meaning real food. This tells you that those have an effect on the DNA also. So the DNA is not the thinking part of the cell. It is the library of information that can be tapped to do all the things that are necessary in terms of making proteins in the body so that the body can function and rebuild itself and do all the things that it needs to do. Now, in order for all this to work properly, it needs both these glyconutrients as part of the process, and we're going to be talking more about the fats. So the fats are going to be the other part of the process, and those two things are extremely critical for the cell membranes, as well as the brain nervous system too. I mean, sometimes we think of the body cells and kind of look at them as being separate from the neurons in the brain, which are also cells, and how they work. So all this that we're talking about is extremely important to know and to understand, and why it's important to have good fatty acids in your body and forget all the cholesterol scam. And we're going to mention that again. We've mentioned it before a couple times, but again, if somebody only is listening to this broadcast, they wouldn't know what I'm talking about if I don't at least mention a little bit about the big cholesterol scam and the billions of dollars and how people have had their livers injured and destroyed and many times died paying a fortune for very expensive pills or capsules that aren't even needed in the first place because you have been lied to about cholesterol and bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, which is not true. There's no such thing as good and bad. Cholesterol is cholesterol. Anyhow, they would lead you to believe that so they can sell you the pills and make a fortune, which they've done. They've made billions and billions of dollars, but we still have people with all the serious cardiovascular problems and deaths, regardless of the fact that they've been pumping these pills into everyone, suggesting that these pills are going to prevent it from happening, when in fact it's not, and when in fact cardiovascular problems are really caused by deficiencies in the first place, which we've talked about before. So I see by the Mickey Mouse clock, the big hand is on one and the little hand's on the other, and it's saying we should shut our mouth and get finished up here so that we can conclude in our next broadcast everything more you need to know about fats and sugars. Well, not everything, because some of the things I know you wouldn't understand, so I won't even burden you with trying to get it to you, but show you the importance of good health as it relates to these factors and the importance of knowing what the good fats are and the good sugars and what they can do for you. So don't forget to go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com. You can find a link from there to go to our other website called Alternative Health and Prevention, which tells you something about the type of therapy I do and has some search engines you can find out information and so forth. And also don't forget to peruse through our site. We have all the books that we suggest are listed there. We have a link right through to Amazon, that you can purchase the books from Amazon through our site, and we have other things related to health, and we'll probably mention the one again, which is the Heart Math Institute, because it has some extremely good information about some of the things that we're talking about, and equipment that can help you deal with stress, because stress is one of those other factors that affect the cell function via disturbing the membrane and so forth. So what I'm doing is laying out all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, so when you put them all together, you get the big picture of how your body can be either healthy or not so healthy, and it can live a long time or not so long time. It was nice being with you again, so we look forward to talking with you again next week.